Things do not always go according to plan. I was originally supposed to arrive in Japan for the first time in my life, the day before yesterday. But on my travels, I had one full day sitting in the airport while they kept postponing and canceling my flight. So, I confess I am still a little bit jet-lagged. I may not be thinking entirely clearly. I also did not plan to be teaching you wearing a mask. I know it makes it harder to understand me. What I've done more than anything else in my teaching career is I've taught public speaking. You'll notice I'm not using the microphone. That might change. I know sometimes if people have hearing impairments, it helps if the sound is coming through the speakers in the ceiling, because then it's not coming from one spot at the front of the room. I know this because one of the first things you can learn about me is I have a hearing impairment. I don't hear at all in this ear, which means when you come and speak to me in a conversation, you might notice I'm going to do this a lot. That's because this ear can hear, this ear can't. All of that is to say, things don't always go according to plan, but we roll with them and we do our best. Now, right now, I have not started in to the chief part of what I want to do in this class meeting, because at the same time this class is meeting, there's a faculty meeting happening on Zoom, and they've asked me to join that meeting for just a moment and introduce myself. And I'm going to get invited from the back of the room to go and do that any minute now. So I'm not going to get too far into an explanation that I would just have to break off and continue later. But I can tell you what I plan to do with our 90 minutes today. I plan to start off by telling you a story, and I'll try to be very careful not to make it a long-winded, boring, repetitive story. It's actually my story, and I have been invited to the back to join a faculty meeting. I'll be right back. Talk amongst yourselves.
Today we have Dr. Joel Slater from National University, the Fulbright Scholar. Welcome to our university.
はじめまして。
Dr. Slater is Professor of Speech and Communication at National University, and he arrived yesterday, right?
And my project here is to teach argumentation and debate, which is my background, but also to teach about relational communication and how healthy argument strengthens relationships. And right now, I'm teaching argumentation and debate, and my roster says I have 46 students, which is the most I've ever had in a class. So I'm very excited. But I want them all to debate, and figuring out how to find time for that may be challenging, but it's a challenge I love.
Thank you very much.
Pleased to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And if you're at all curious about what I said in the faculty meeting, you'll learn right away. This thing on my shirt, I'm actually recording this, and you'll have the recordings of all the lectures later on. Well, this was on, and it was recording while I was talking to them, so you can find out what I said. Let me now tell you a story. When I was a very small child, I did not often play sports with the other children because I was not strong, I was not fast, I was not coordinated. And most of all, I didn't really have any competitive instinct. I didn't really care if I lost. And you don't improve at sports if losing just doesn't matter to you. When I was 12 years old, the school I was attending all of a sudden had a speech and debate team. And I found the kind of competition I could get really excited about. Because all those years I had not been playing sports, I'd been reading books. So if there's anyone here who grew up and really loved to read, and reading was your escape, And the people in the books you read, they became your friends. You and I have something in common, because that was a lot of my childhood. But now there was the speech and debate team, and I joined it. And I wasn't particularly good at it, but it was okay. I loved the arguments. The arguments were so beautiful. They were so logical, and the reasons fit together. And even though most of the people I debated beat me, I was having so much fun that I didn't get discouraged. Well, I graduated from high school, and I went off to college. And about, 200-kilometer drive from the house I grew up in was a college called Baylor University. And back at the end of the 1980s, Baylor's college debate team was really, really good. My second year in college, we won the United States National Championship in debate. And again, I was not one of the team members who was beating Harvard and beating all the top opponents in the country. But the ones who were my teammates, and I was learning from them. And I was also taking part in the research and the strategies, and I saw up close what it takes to make really, really good arguments. And I decided that's what I want to do with my entire life. So I went on to get a bachelor's degree in communication studies, because in the United States, most debate teams are in the communication department. I went on to get my master's, and then I went for my doctorate in argumentation at the University of Georgia. And in those years, I was an assistant coach with the debate team at the University of Georgia. And in my last year there, a team I was coaching made it all the way to the championship round. And if they won that debate, they were going to be the national champions. And they lost. Very lopsidedly. And interestingly, they didn't lose because they didn't speak well. They lost because they didn't listen. Their opponent made an argument that they misunderstood, and they answered it the wrong way. And 2 hours later, they had lost, and their opponents were the national champions. So I went from there to become a full-time college debate coach. I was the director of debate at Arizona State University. And I realized right away I had made a bad mistake. You remember why I didn't play sports with the other kids? Wasn't strong, wasn't fast, and fundamentally, I didn't care if I lost. You're not going to be a good coach if losing doesn't bother you. And I realized about a year and a half into that job, I had very hardworking, gifted, bright team members who needed a coach who cared as much about their wins and their losses as they did. And that wasn't me. So I resigned, and I got out of coaching debate. I still loved debate, but I was not the right person to be the coach. Well, I now needed a job. And when I was in graduate school, I had been assigned to teach some classes in the communication department. Primarily, I taught Introduction to Public Speaking. So after I stopped being a debate coach, for a few years, that's all I did, just taught public speaking, class after class after class. Little by little, as my bosses decided I was an okay teacher, they started assigning me other things in the area of interpersonal communication, how people talk to one another in romantic relationships, between best friends, sometimes in the workplace. And the more classes in that area I started to teach, the more I thought I was leaving debate further and further behind, because I had always thought of debate as an extension of public speaking. You know what your opponent's argument is, you know why you think they're wrong, and you say out loud why they are wrong while the judge listens to you, and the judge at the end decides who won and who lost. It all seemed to me like public speaking. I wound up at the university I currently teach at, Bushnell University. And at Bushnell University, almost everything I teach is interpersonal communication. And just a few years ago, I stumbled across the research of a man that we're going to talk about in detail 1 week from today. We're going to go in depth into his findings. His name is Dominic Infante. He's an interesting guy. For a while, he was a debate coach. For another while, he tried to make a career as an opera singer. But what he demonstrated was people in close relationships, wives and husbands, best friends, they argue. And not in the sense that they yell at one another and get angry and say cruel things and try to hurt one another. Not in that sense at all. They argue in the sense that they'll take a topic about which it's okay to disagree, and they'll say, this is my position, these are my reasons, and it's okay with me if you want to question them or try to pick them apart. And I'll do the same thing to you. And along the way, we'll grow to trust one another more, and we'll both be better informed, we'll learn from one another, and we'll make better decisions. And as I became familiar with more and more of his research, I realized all that time I spent learning about argument, it wasn't just about public speaking. It was also about healthy interpersonal communication in close relationships. Now, I've told you that entire story to lay the groundwork for this class. I have one more little illustration I want to give you, and then we're going to get down to the actual details of the class. For much of the 1900s, for maybe from the 1920s through about the 1950s, one of the most popular sports that people loved to watch, they would read the paper to see who was winning and who was losing. In the United States, it was boxing. Throw your punch, try to knock out your opponent, try to hit them so hard that they can't get up again. And things don't always go according to plan. I had planned to have visuals for you. We were working on getting the visuals to work, but if I'd tried to show them to you, they didn't really match the direction I'm going today, so I promise you there will be visuals next week and every week from now on. But one thing I was going to show you today was, back in the 1940s and 50s in the United States, not only did grown men box professionally, but they would send their children, primarily their sons, to boxing lessons when they were as young as 5 and 6 years old. And they would learn how to throw a punch, a really hard punch, and knock out their opponent. In the United States today, boxing is not that popular anymore. What we understand now is, if you have a career in boxing, all those punches, they accumulate. And people who are professional boxers very, very commonly wind up with a form of Parkinson's disease. And some people who play American football have something similar, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's what you get when your sport is try to hit and hurt the other person until they can't continue. I keep saying that this was popular in the United States up until about 1950. In 1950, something replaced it. And that something people in the United States call karate. I think it's supposed to be pronounced karate. And I think we got it from you. And the thing about karate, I'm going to use the United States pronunciation, the thing about it is, it's a discipline, it's something to master. You do want to score a hit on your opponent, but you and your opponent are also supposed to show respect for one another. It is about confrontation, but it's also about, can I be more skillful than my opponent, all the while not hating my opponent. So one of the things we'll talk about next week is the difference between argument and verbal aggression. Verbal aggression describes trying to say something to another person that is so hurtful that you upset them so much that they can't or don't want to continue the conversation. And I get very sad when I hear something like that happen and I hear people call it an argument, because it's not an argument. Arguments are about, this is my position, this is my evidence, and I respect you, and you can question any of it and tell me your reasons and your evidence, and I'll examine that and we'll both get smarter. Verbal aggression is about hurting them so much they can't continue, and they're not the same thing at all. So that warm-up is meant to give you the concept of what the class is about. And so where I want to take you from here, and what I want to do with the balance of our time. There's one more thing I want to say, actually. I talked so long that my notes went to sleep. What I have been told, and I've been in Japan less than 24 hours, the only thing I know about Japan and the only thing I know about Japanese people and Japanese college students is what I've read. And what I have read is that there is a tradition of being very, very reluctant to confront, that you're taught that arguing is not healthy and does not strengthen relationships. We're going to talk about some of the reasons that it might. And if nothing else, this class is meant to be a look inside the thinking of people from the West, a lot of people from Europe, definitely people from the United States. It's meant to help you understand how they think the way they do, and possibly to give you a tool to put in your toolbox for when you have coworkers in the future who are from the United States. And I mentioned before, that I am here on a Fulbright grant. And the Fulbright grant that brought me here, their objective was to create an intercultural experience. And so, even if the things I talk about, you think, well, with my family, with my friends, in my workplace, this would never work. If you find yourself in situations that are intercultural experiences, it might work. And I also know that historically, sometimes cultures change, maybe very slowly, but they do change. Boxing is not popular in the United States anymore, but I know a whole lot of parents who sign their daughters and their sons up for karate lessons because they want them to learn what karate teaches. All right. Let me talk for a few minutes about the specific moving parts, the elements that make up the class. And one thing I want to say at the outset, I absolutely love it, and I'm not being sarcastic, I do love this. I love it when students raise their hand and interrupt me to ask, not interrupt, but raise their hand because they have a question. I love, love, love that because I can never tell if I'm being clear, if I'm making sense or not. But if you tell me what it is that needs clarifying, that's enormously helpful. So please do that whenever you can. First moving part of the class, about the first, a little over half of the class is going to be lecture. And by the first about half of the class, I mean weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5 will be lecture. Next week is going to be the research on argumentativeness and verbal aggression that I was just talking about. The week after that will be the basics of understanding competitive debate. And what I'll do with that is give you the concepts and give you some of the basic strategies, basic tactics, things that you do when you're in a debate. And you're going to hold on to that knowledge and familiarize yourself with it for a couple of weeks. In week 4, we are going to talk, if I'm remembering it right, about the contrast between American argument style and Japanese argument style, and there's a fair amount of research on it, so I'm going to walk you through that. In week 5, I am going to talk with you about some fairly cutting-edge research. It's only about 5 years old out of the field of psychology that makes the bold claim that human beings' reasoning ability is not suited to individual people making their own decisions. One person thinking all by themselves about what it is that they want to do, what it is that information they've received, how is it properly understood. One person doing that on their own, very commonly they do a bad job. They make a mess of it. But when we take information and decisions about what we want to do and we talk to each other about them, the outcomes are a lot better. Now, these are not communication people doing this. This is actually a French psychologist by the name of Hugo Mercier. And he says, individual people are so bad at being logical, you have to think logic was never intended to be for one person to use by themselves. Our logic only makes a difference when we try to be logical so that other people will agree with us. When we use it that way, it actually works well. He calls it his argumentative theory of logic. And it makes a very strong case that arguing with each other is what we need to be doing. After that week, that's in week 5. Weeks 6, 7, and 8, we are going to debate. Now, how that's going to work depends on how many people are in the class. My roster a week ago said that there were 36 students in this class, and I made a schedule for 36 students to debate. I checked this afternoon, and it said that there are 46 students in the class. And I can adjust, but what I can say is right now, today, the situation is a little fluid. We will figure out when you're going to debate and how that's going to work probably about week 4, when we're still 2 weeks out. But I'm going to pause here and see if you have any questions you want to ask me before I talk in detail about how the debating part of the class is going to work. A teacher trick I learned a long time ago, if any of you ever plan to be teachers, teachers often, well, American teachers, make the mistake of saying, does anyone have any questions? And then they stand here for about 5 seconds, and then they continue. And that's not long enough. When you have a question, you haven't decided whether you want to ask it or even what form it should take. So I sometimes will stand up here for a good minute, because questions need time to form. And now I am going to stand up here for about a minute. And if you have a question, take your time, get comfortable with it, and then ask it, and we'll field it. Okay, the offer stays open. Here's how debating is going to work in this class. 3 consecutive class meetings we're going to have debates. The first of those days, our debates will be over topics of fact. People have tried to say to me in the past, you can't debate facts. Facts are either true or they're not true. But there are a lot of facts that actually are energetically debated by scientists, by experts. Some of them involve definitions. Some of them involve predictions of the future. A debate topic is a topic of fact if ultimately a right or wrong answer exists. We just don't know what it is. If we were to have a debate over are unidentified flying objects intelligent alien beings from other planets, that's a topic of fact, because ultimately either they are or they aren't. But we don't know, and there's some evidence on both sides. So we will have a day when we debate topics of fact. Now I should say, this is one of the times I kind of wish that we had visuals up. Because, actually I might be able to do this. Bear with me for just one moment. See if this will wake up. Oh, it did, and there are my notes. You don't need to see that. But I'll come over here and see if I can get into Google Classroom. Because what I have done, I set everything in Google Classroom to become visible at 1 o'clock today, thinking that what I wanted to do was to give you a tour. Yeah, not that one. I wanted to give you a tour as class was in session. Why are you doing that? Let's see. You might get another moment to be able to talk to your friends. Well, I see if this. Because if I can get this to work, this should be helpful. Let's see. Are we in? Are we in? we in? That is deciding whether we're in. I will begin by telling you we're going to do one day of fact topics. The fact topics have already been chosen for that day. And here's what's going to happen. There's a Google form where you will be expected to submit one argument for one side of the topic or the other side of the topic. And that Google form sends its results to a Google spreadsheet that is already linked in Google Classroom. This does not look like it's going to cooperate with me. Let me see. Yeah. Try it one more time. It sends its results to a Google Sheet that is already available to you, and you can see what arguments your classmates submitted. Then what we're going to do, on the day we have the debate, the format of the debate, of debating that we're going to use, there will be 4 students speaking for the topic, 4 students speaking against the topic, and we're going to do it at random. I'm going to put a Google spreadsheet up here, and I'm going to put the entire class roster in. I'm going to generate random numbers, and the 8 names that jump to the top who are here that day will become the 8 debaters. All the arguments that your classmates submitted will have been visible to you for more than a week. There will be no surprises. You can look at the arguments, you can get very familiar with them, and then each speaker, alternating taking turns, will give a 3-minute speech. That really is just not going to work, so I'm going to make that go away. Boom. We'll give a 3-minute speech. Now that my attention's not divided with this, let me give you a slightly more concrete example of it using a topic we actually are going to use. The second day we do debates, the second week we do debates, we're not going to do fact topics, we're going to do value topics. Value topics say that one thing is better than another thing, or that one thing is either a good thing or a bad thing in a very special way. One of the topics we're going to debate on Value Topic Day is dogs make better pets than cats. I've used that topic forever and ever, and it's a really good class debate topic because there are lots of arguments, and it's pretty evenly matched on both sides. For any argument you can make in favor of cats, there's a good argument in favor of dogs. So, people in the class will submit their arguments. You'll submit an argument in favor of cats or an argument in favor of dogs. And then 8 people will be chosen. You won't know in advance. You might be the first speaker in favor of it being dogs. You might be the third speaker in favor of it being cats. But you'll have the spreadsheet in front of you. It will have been available for a full week. In your 3-minute speech, you'll do one or both of 2 things. You'll either make an argument in favor of your side. If you're in favor of cats, you'll make an argument that cats are better. You'll also be expected and rewarded to take at least one argument that a previous speaker made and to say why it's incorrect. And the form, when you put your argument in, the last blank on it will say, what's a good way to attack this argument or prove that it's flawed? So as you look at all the arguments for why cats are better or for why dogs are better, at the end you'll see a reason that that argument is flawed. So that's the way the debate format is going to happen. 4 speeches in favor, 4 speeches against, taking turns. Speaker positions are assigned randomly. All the arguments are contributed from the entire class and are visible from the beginning. The intent here is to try to get pretty good debates for people who don't have a lot of past experience debating and for there to be no surprises. Now I'm going to pause and see, do you have any questions about how that's going to work? Yes, ma'am.
I should introduce myself. My name is Liu. I'm from English department.
Wonderful.
And I have 2 questions about this debate process. And the first one is I want to check about the debate. So, you mean that we just upload our debate, like the articles about what we want to debate in the class before we just start a debate at classroom?
So I think the question was, do you go out, look at articles, and suggest topics for debate? And the answer to that question is, I've actually already picked topics. What I was trying to do in getting Google Classroom to work, which it didn't want to, was to show you what the topics are. When you get into Google Classroom, and if you can get to it on your devices, the topics are already up. You can look at them. If someone wants to look at the forums and tell me what they are, we can talk about them. But the topics are already set. I chose the topics in advance because I was careful to pick topics where there are good arguments on both sides. I said before you can debate facts, but you can't debate 2 + 2 is 4 because there are no good arguments against it. So if students pick what they want to debate, the danger is you wind up with a lot of topics where all the strong arguments are on one side, and you don't learn how to debate unless there's good arguments on the other side. Now, you said you had 2 things you wanted to check, so I think I only addressed the first. Do you have a second?
Second is how shall we just find some reference before we writing or preparing for debate, or will you, sir, you will provide some references before the debate?
So the question is, do you go and find references? Will I provide the references? And the answer is, the form on which you submit your arguments has a blank near the bottom that says, if this is from a published source, put the link here, or put the title of the source here. But a lot of times people come up with good arguments, winnable arguments that are not from a published source. One of the things you can do during the debate, if an opponent they're asserting an argument that they need proof for, you could point out, they don't have a source for that. I don't believe that they're right. So an argument is stronger if it came from a published source. But are you required to have a published source for all your arguments? No. Because arguments often don't have them.
That's all.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for the questions. Those were quite good. Is this a... I thought your hand was up for a question. Apologies. Anyone else have one? Yes, ma'am.
Is English proficiency important, or do you value content more? Like, which do you value?
I missed the first part of your questions.
Is English proficiency important?
English proficiency. I'll answer that the same way. With my students back in the United States, I sometimes have them take tests that are essay tests, where it's a timed essay, and they're in the room, and I give them the question, and they write the essay. And they ask me, is spelling and grammar important? And I tell them, I realize you're under pressure. I realize I just gave you the question, and the clock is running. So am I going to be picky about your spelling and grammar? No. Am I going to be picky about your English proficiency? No. But the thing I always put on the end of that is, go back and reread what you wrote at least once, because if I genuinely can't tell what you're trying to say, it's hard to give you credit for it. So English proficiency is not the major part. Your English is not going to be perfect, but it's much better than my Japanese. I know about that much Japanese, and that much I usually get wrong. And English, Japanese, or any other language looks messy when you're in the middle of becoming good at it. So people who have a lot of guts and a lot of courage and maybe don't follow the kind of English that I'm used to, I still find what you say and the way you put it really beautiful. So proficiency, it's only important to the degree that I need to get your basic meaning. Other than that, don't let it slow you down. Use the words you got. Okay, these are very good questions. I would love more if you have any. The plan originally, when we had 36 students, I looked at the amount of time we had available and I decided these debates, each speaker, the very first speaker in the debate speaking in favor of the topic would get a 2-minute speech. Everybody else would get a 3-minute speech, except the last speaker would get only 2 minutes. And let's see, where's the easiest place for everybody? I better not write on that. Let's see. In this particular format of debate that we're going to use, sometimes called parliamentary, the team speaking in favor of the topic, cats are better than dogs, is called the government. And the team speaking against the topic is called the opposition. So we would say government, opposition, and 2 more times. The first speaker for the government will get only 2 minutes. The reason for that is everybody else is expected to point, or at least rewarded for, pointing out an argument a previous speaker made and explaining why it's wrong. But the first speaker can't do that. There haven't been any previous speakers. So that speech is a little bit shorter. Everybody else will speak for 3 minutes, except the last opposition speaker gives a 2-minute speech. That's just to even it up and make it fair. So the government had a total of 11 minutes of speaking time, and so did the opposition, which means each round of debate takes 22 minutes, 11 minutes to a side, which means in a 90-minute class, we can very easily fit in 3 of these. If there were no pauses anywhere, it would take 66 minutes. Because we are all human, there will be little bits of time while people sit down and stand up, and it's good for there to be time at the end of class to say, these were arguments I heard that were really good. This is an argument that I was waiting to hear. I thought, oh, why not make that argument? And we have that discussion, and it tends to let people get a real grip on whether the debate went well and what they could have done differently. So that is a glance at the mechanics of the debate. Oh, I remember the train of thought that I was on there. Originally, everybody in the class was going to do 2 debates. There were going to be 3 debate days. One of the days you weren't going to debate at all. The other days you were going to debate at least once. Because we have 8 debaters here. If we have 4 of them, then we have 32. And that means we have 96 slots over 3 days. And the math worked out to where if you debated twice, we would have a pretty full complement of debates over those 3 days. Now that we have 46 students, the way I think it's going to work is we might have, on different days, we might only have 2 debates, and other days 3 debates. It's going to depend on who comes to class. But what my assumption will be is you need to participate in at least 1 debate. Now, if the days the debates are happening, if you're not able to be here, because of work, because of job interviews, because of life happening, we will have debates with the people who are here. And if you're able to come to the first debate day and you participate in your debate and you're happy with it and it goes reasonably well, you did good, you're done. If you come to the first debate day, it didn't really go that well, you had a lot of problems, and you want to debate again, you can do it. And I will keep the highest grade out of all the debates you had and get rid of the rest. Because I would encourage you to keep trying. If you can't make it to the first debate day or the second debate day, but you do make it to the third debate day and you participate, then you've participated once, and that will satisfy the assignment. That's how that's going to work. Let me pause here and see, does anyone have any questions about that? So in moving parts of the class, we've talked about there will be lecture. We've talked about there will be debates. There's a third moving part. The third moving part, I believe it's labeled in Google Classroom as reports. There is a podcast. It was originally dreamed up and it was deployed in England. It was originally an English podcast. But there's a version of it in the United States, and it's called Intelligence Squared. And with Intelligence Squared on that podcast, they pick a topic and then they get together experts who will agree to debate the opposing sides of the topic. And then they broadcast that, and they have a standard format. The quality of the debating is kind of up and down. The people participating in it know a lot about the subject matter. Some of them you can tell they have no background in debate. Some of them, I think they probably were competitive debaters at some point. One of them that my students always love, you'll see that there's one debate in there called Are Men Finished? And one of the debaters is a journalist named Hannah Rosin. And I remember Hannah. She was a great debater in high school, one of the best in the United States. And when you hear her, you'll believe it, because she will go right for the throats. She is a very, very powerful debater. The assignments. You and a classmate will pick a topic, pick one of those debates. You'll listen to it. And another thing I was going to show you, if the visuals would cooperate, and actually this I might be able to get to work because this is not dependent on Google Classroom. So once again, let me fire this up and put my notes away and see if I can get this to work properly. Bump, bump. Bump. All right. All of the links in that assignment will take you to this site. And none of those are what I want. So, bump. Let me find one that I do want. Should we search for extraterrestrial life? If you were to go here, this is the mobile version, so of course it's not showing what I want. I don't want the comments either. Let's see. Should we isolate Russia? This is a little better. Okay, there are tabs here. This tab right here, read the brief. If you go there, you'll see the arguments on both sides are outlined. That may help you as you listen to the debate to see the outline of their arguments. You will also see, if you come up to the search to listen, if you were to go here to the podcast and you were to pick Russia, what it should bring up there should be a version of it that comes up to where you can listen to it through your browser. And it's important to me that you listen to the audio recorded version. Bear with me one more second because I was not able to get isolate to come up. So, quit that. Bump. Oh, here it is. Isolate Russia. Bump, bump. And that, let's see, it did not find. Things do not always go according to plan. My hope is that you're able to get through the site and you're able to find the recording. You and a classmate will listen to the recording. There's then a Google form, and the Google form is the report that you will do. And it will ask, what's the best argument you heard? What's the weakest argument you heard? Who do you think won the debate? And why? And depending on our time, one of the things I've written into the instructions for that assignment is we may have time available at the end of the days where there are lecture for you and your partner to take just a minute and tell the class, these are the arguments that were made in the debate. These are the ones we thought were good. We thought this side won, and here's why. We may not have time for that. Things do not always go according to plan. Originally, my plan was for you to do 2 of those reports. If we have 46 students actively participating in the class, we will run out of debates. So I think I may have to tentatively say that you're only going to do 1 of those. Okay, that's the third moving part. The first was lecture. The second was debates. The third was the intelligence squared reports. The fourth and final moving part of the class is the final exam. The final exam takes place at the last class meeting. Here is what's going to happen at the final exam. At the end of every lecture day, I will post essay questions, and they are the actual essay questions for the final exam. On the day you take the final, if you have a laptop, it would be beautiful if you could bring it. If you don't have a laptop, but you have really beautiful handwriting in English, that's fine. You can take the final exam by writing out your answers. If you're not confident in your handwriting and you don't have a laptop, we'll take those case by case and we'll find the solution. But here's how you're going to get the questions. You will pick one question you feel confident answering. Every one of the questions will have a number code, and I'll present the questions to you in a spreadsheet so you can pick the question that you're really confident answering with its code and just write out your answer that day in class. And then I'm going to have scraps of paper shuffled with the entire pool of essay questions, and you'll draw one. And you'll answer that question too. So you get to pick a question that you think you're on top of, and then Random Chance gets to pick a question, and we see if you can do a good job on a question that's been sprung on you. Now, I give tons of partial credits. I'm not going to look at your answer to an essay question and say, well, it's not perfect, so you get a 0. So you shouldn't worry about, I'm going to answer the question I'm confident about and then wind up with a 50. If you do a strong job on the answer on the question you know well, and you do an okay job on the answer that you drew out of the pile, then you're going to get a pretty reasonable grade. Just to give you an idea of what kinds of essay questions, I can give you one that I think will probably be one of the essay questions on the exam. And it will say, what specific kind of communication situation are people who are high in argumentativeness not good at, and why? And we're going to talk about that a week from today. People who measure high in trait argumentativeness are more effective in a lot of communication situations, except they're not better at comforting people. They're not better at providing support. When you have a friend who is sad, who's had something painful happen and they're hurting, people who are high in argumentativeness are not as good in that situation. And the reason why is they come up with lots of reasons. They come up with lots of reasoning, lots of logic. And we know what helps people who are suffering is not evidence and reasoning. It's affection, proximity, affirmation that you're going to be there and you're going to be a confidant. It's being a good social supporter, which is fundamentally not about arguments. What you will do is you write out your answer to the question, and what I want you to do is take a real-life example from your life, and I want you to illustrate it. Pretend that you're teaching the concept to a friend who didn't take this class. So give what the right answer to the question is, and then say, so let's imagine my cousin who was supposed to get married last year, but then it got called off. And she cried for 3 days straight, couldn't eat, could barely get out of bed. Let's say I went to her and I made all these arguments. It wouldn't comfort her at all. That's what I want you to do. Take an example from your life and illustrate the answer. Now, the reason I want you to do this, what the research on learning tells us, is when you take what you're learning and you connect it up with an example from your own life, you understand it better and you retain it better. So that's going to be part of the format of the final exam. Give me the answer to the essay prompt, illustrate it with something from your own life. And we're going to do that at the very last class meeting. And I will let you in on one more thing. Back in the United States, my students at my university, I have a reputation with them that I am tough, that I fail more students than anybody else on campus. It's probably true. And I see the looks on your face. I'm building up to something that's going to be comforting. Please trust me. I set foot in Japan for the first time yesterday. I've never taught on this island, let alone on this campus. I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about what kind of teaching works and doesn't. There's something that they teach medical students in medical school. They teach them, first, do no harm. So I'm coming into this class, and this is my way of admitting to you, in this class, I'm going to be really easy. My grading standards, if you turn in work and it's an honest attempt, and it shows me that you paid some attention, you're grappling with the material, I'm going to give pretty high grades. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do that next semester, but this is my first exposure to you and your first exposure to me. So don't get too worried that I'm going to be strict and tough, because when you don't know a learning environment and you don't know what the students need and what works, it doesn't make sense to be tough. So I'm not planning to be tough. Here's another good place for me to pause and see if you want to ask me any questions. The final part of the class, and we are, if I read this right and if I started it at the right time, we should have about 40 minutes left. This is going to be about us getting to know each other. And I, first of all, because there are a fair number of you, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. Quick homework, won't take you that long. The first part, what I want you to do is compose an email to me. And my email at Suda is TN2419. TN2419. In this email, you will get full credit for your homework if you do both of the following things. Put in a picture of yourself that you think looks like you, to where if I learn that face, I will recognize you. Ideally without a mask. I know I may only see you with a mask on, but still, I'm trying to learn names and faces. It's challenging. A picture that looks like you. Second thing, what you like to be called. When I speak to you, when I call you by name, what is it that you would like to be called? Whether it's here in class or when we bump into each other around campus or around the neighborhood. What is it that you would like to be called? And I know Suda has a whole lot of language students, so I know that you're probably very familiar with flashcards. And I'm going to make me some flashcards. And I am going to try, I'm making a challenge to myself by week 3 to know everybody's name. Going from 0, not having been on this campus, not having met any of you before. I'm going to try. There's a little bit, I won't call it extra credit because it's not, but there's one other thing that you could put in this email if you want. And I would love it and I would be grateful if you did. Take something that you really love, that it is possible to experience in this neighborhood. Could be a place, could be a hobby, could be just some place to go and sit and be quiet and think. But something you love. And describe it to me and tell me why you love it. And I may go and give it a try and see for myself. And specifically what I want to ask is, don't pick something that you know, well, when the Americans come here, this is what the Americans like. Because I don't want people to steer me to things that are like things I've tried before. I want to try things I've never tried before, I never would have known existed. So if you've got something that is really, really enjoyable to you, and maybe other people don't get it, and you wish more people did appreciate it, you have in me a willing pupil. Send me off to give it a try. You don't have to include it. If that stumps you, don't put it in, and it won't be a problem. You'll get full credit if I have some tips on how to say your name and a picture that looks like you. All right. We are doing that in lieu of going around the room and asking everybody to introduce themselves. That tends to produce very strong communication anxiety in about a quarter of the room. And any information I would get by hearing that from you, I would probably instantly, and any information that came my way, I probably wouldn't remember 5 minutes later. So we're going to do that this way instead. But I am going to spend part of our remaining time, I'm going to introduce myself to you. I'm going to give you some basic facts about me, and then I'm going to take 3 things that are true of me, which might give you misunderstandings. And I'm going to address those misunderstandings head on, and then we're going to wrap up class. So here's basic information about me. My name. I have not talked this loudly through a mask in about a year, because back on my campus, we've been out of masks for a while. My name. My name is Doyo Schrader. Doyo Schrader. The spelling is D-O-Y-L-E. Some people will try to pronounce my name Doyle or Doyle. Honestly, I go by Doyo. So if you call me Doyo, that's what I'm most familiar with. Now I know what's common here is for you to address me by my last name, and you might call me Shredo-sensei. All my students in the United States, and I mean all of them, because it's a practice on my campus in the United States, they all call me by my first name. And I know I'm a guest here, and I know when you're a guest in another country, you ought to operate by their rules. But this classroom is an intercultural learning experience. You're being taught by an American professor, and I am accustomed to being addressed by my first name. So I really would invite you to the point of asking, call me Doyo. Doyo-san, Doyo-sensei, whatever goes with it. But that's my name. I live in Oregon. I teach at Bushnell University. Bushnell University is in a city called Eugene. It's the same city as the University of Oregon. As a matter of fact, Bushnell, which is a little liberal arts college, kind of like this one, it's right across the street. You can cross a one-lane street, and there is the 30,000 student University of Oregon right there. We get to use their library. It's a nice setup. I am 53 years old. I am not married. I have no children. I go to bed really, really early, wake up really, really early, and despite the cracks about jet lag at the beginning of class, I don't know what it is, I'm immune to jet lag. When I say I go to bed early, most nights I go to bed about 7 p.m. And I wake up 3 a.m., no alarm clock. It is beautiful at 3 a.m. It's so quiet, so peaceful. Days like this, it's actually cool at 3 a.m. So I don't know where I picked up that habit, but I'm very glad I have it. I will say, I do sometimes get a little bit, but by the time we're getting close to 2:30, it's a lot closer to my bedtime than it is to yours. My sense of humor might get a little loopy. I might get wires crossed. I might get words switched up. If it happens, it's because for me, it's getting late in the day. Back in the United States, I do not own a car. I do not own a television. Until this past June, I had never in my life owned a cell phone. And I used to brag to people that I wanted to go to retirement and even death, never having owned a cell phone. I got the cell phone, honestly, because of the Fulbright grant and because of traveling to Japan. You can't be in a country where you know very little of the language and not have the tools available to you from a cell phone. So now I have one. But I tell all my students and all my colleagues back in the United States, when I come back at the end of the year, this is going in a drawer, and I'm not going to carry it with me, and I'm not going to use it. It's a conversation we could have in more detail another time if you're interested. Those things are not healthy. They're useful, but there are lots of useful things that exact a terrible, terrible price on you. And I was doing okay not having one until I had to uproot my life and cross the Pacific Ocean. Okay, the 3 things about me that might lead to some misunderstandings. Thing number 1, I am a college professor, and in particular, I am an American college professor. The first misunderstanding, when you hear that I have a doctorate, that I've been promoted all the way to full professor, the top rank, when you hear that I have been published in peer-reviewed journals and that I've been given outstanding faculty awards at my university about every 3 or 4 years. When you hear all of that, you might think, he must have been really good in school. Actually, do you know I graduated in the bottom half of my high school class? Do you know that in the United States, they measure your average grades in college on a 4-point scale? 4 is an A, 3 is a B, 2 is a C, which is the lowest passing grade. I was in college for 5 years because it took that long for me to graduate. And my GPA hovered around a 2 until my last semester. Now, a lot of the reason, both for the high school finish and for the GPA in college, is I was putting all my attention into debate. I only paid enough attention to my classes to make sure I squeaked by and passed. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to win more debates. And I thought I was learning from the research and preparation I went into the debate topics just as much, if not more, as I was in my classes. But all of that to say, you can wind up an academic, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you always did a flawless job in your classes. Every fall, back in the United States, I teach a class called First Year Seminar for newly arriving students. And a lot of them are absolutely terrified they might fail a class. And to them, they just think they couldn't go on if they failed a class. And I get to tell them, I failed 3 classes in college. It's not the end of the world when you fail a class. It's no fun, and you've created more work for yourself. But you get up the next morning, and the sun comes up, and you go on with your life, and you figure out, where I am right now, what am I going to do now? A couple of other things about college professors from the United States. I am told, I don't know if this is true, that college professors in Japan tend to be very formal, and that there tends to be a very clear higher and lower in authority, a very clear hierarchy. That's a lot less true in the United States. Some professors in the United States are about, I am in charge and I have all the power. They tend not to be respected. The professors who earn more respect in the United States don't take themselves too seriously. One of the visuals I was going to show you was of a professor of physics who one day every year paints his entire face blue and comes to class and teaches as a Smurf. Because why not? And it's usually the point of the term when students are getting tired and feeling the pressure, and there's Professor Smurf, and it raises their spirits. They get a kick out of it. He's secure in who he is. And that's kind of the environment and community. I may have no voice left by the end of this. The environment and community that I come out of. The final thing you might want to know about American college professors. I think this is kind of true in Japan, but I think it's somewhat different. There are 2 kinds of college professors in the United States. There are professors at a research institution and professors at a teaching institution. And at research institutions, the professors are expected to publish as often as possible, and they're told by their bosses, don't waste too much time on your teaching. So what they will often do is come to class with just a PowerPoint and read the PowerPoint. Click through the slides and read the PowerPoint. And then test the students on whether they memorize the PowerPoint. Other professors in the United States teach at what we call teaching colleges. Their job security depends on, in the student evaluation of teaching, are the students saying, this is powerful teaching and I learned from it. Bushnell University is a teaching college. I wouldn't want to be a research professor. I have friends who are research professors. They love what they do. Good for them. I want to engage with students, and I want what I do to help students learn. So that's the environment I come out of. The second thing, that if you know it about me, it tells you something about me, but it might give you some mistaken impressions. In the United States, I am from Texas. This is where I grew up in Texas. I lived in Texas from the time I was born until I was 24, moved away for about 6 years for graduate school and a job at Arizona State, moved back to Texas for another 8 years, and from there moved to Oregon. Now, when I tell people who are not from the United States that I'm from Texas, they assume that I grew up wearing a cowboy hat, riding horse, had guns, shot everybody. That's just kind of a United States assumption. Texas is actually a really big state. And one of the visuals I was planning on showing you is Texas overlaid over Japan, because area-wise, it's more than twice as big as all of Japan. So Texas, in a lot of people's imaginations, is all desert and tumbleweeds. But I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, which is a big city. And the place I lived for 8 years was a pine forest, all pine trees, and all very, very green, and we used to get a lot of rain there. And that just doesn't match people's understanding of what Texas is. So what's true of Texas? I'll tell you what's true of Texas. Texas and Hawaii are the only 2 states in the United States that used to be their own country. Hawaii was a kingdom, And Texas, before it was admitted to the Union, was the Republic of Texas. Had their own money, had their own Congress, everything. And in their imagination, they're still a country. They still like being independent. About 2 years ago, in the middle of winter, there were massive blackouts all over Texas during a freak cold snap. Because across the United States, the electric grid crosses state lines. So if California has a lot of power and Oregon has a lot of people using power, the power can flow from California into Oregon, not Texas. Texas cuts themselves off from the entire rest of the country. Because we're Texas. We don't want to depend on other people. And so there were people freezing to death in Texas because they couldn't get their power turned back on. And it got so cold from the cold snap, I was going to show you pictures of people's toilets were frozen solid. Someone had a bottle of olive oil that had frozen solid, and there was no power because they didn't want power coming in from other states. So what's this tell you about me? It tells you that no. What it tells you is Texans are very blunt. Texans are very assertive. Don't care what other people think. Tell it like it is. And I have to admit, I kind of have a streak of that. It came in kind of handy in the world of debate. Now, it doesn't mean insulting people. It doesn't mean being cruel. But it does mean sometimes saying, well, this is something that's true and needs to be said. So if your feelings are hurt, then you need to go and tend to your hurt feelings. But I'm still going to say what needs to be said. As a matter of fact, Bushnell University, where I teach right now in Oregon, I had been teaching there for about 2 or 3 years. And my boss sat me down and had a talk with me and said, you're really being a little too blunt with people, and they're really getting some hurt feelings over it. You need to soften up and be a little more gentle with people sometimes. And that was the reaction I got in the United States. So now here I am in Japan. And I am going to try my best to be gentle and to be kind. But going into this, you should know where I come from. And you should know that that is part of the culture in Texas. That's what I was brought up with. I don't do it to be intentionally hurtful. And if I do go too far and you do get your feelings bruised at some point, please tell me if you're comfortable and I'll try to learn from it. But also remind yourself, I'm from a place where that's just how people treat each other. Okay, so that's a bit about me being a professor, me being a Texan. The third and final thing, if you want to understand me, you should know that I am a Christian. And what I'm going to do with the talking about being a Christian is I am going to talk about several misconceptions. And then if you want to hear more about the Christian end of things, I am on campus. I'll be on campus till the end of July 2023. But here is misconception number 1 when you hear that I am a Christian. That means that I have to do good things or else God will get mad at me and send me to hell. If anyone ever sums up Christianity that way, even if they tell you that they are a Christian, all they've really told you is that they don't understand it at all. Not at all. I teach relational communication. So my research area has to do with what do healthy, close relationships and family relationships look like. And I hope that you came out of a really loving, supportive family. I know that not everybody did. But if you did, then I think you know if your parents have shown you so much love over the years and they've set such a good example for you that when you start to do something that you realize they don't like, you're not afraid that they're going to kick you out of the family, but instead you just realize it would cause them pain. You realize they didn't raise you to be that way. And you realize there's a part of you that wants to live up to what they've tried to instill in you. If you know how that feels, it's a little bit closer to knowing someone who is a Christian and growing in their faith. That's the relationship they have to the one God who's the creator of the universe. That this is a family relationship and a loving family relationship. So that's misconception number 1. Misconception number 2. I am anti-science. I don't believe in evolution. I don't believe in global warming. Those are the misconceptions. Don't believe in evolution. Don't believe in global warming. I mean, I'm an academic. My degree is not from, it's not from a Christian university. It's from the University of Georgia, which I could show you the rankings, was the top graduate program in my field the year that I graduated from it. I have dear friends who are physicists, professors of chemistry, professors of biology, professors of math, who are devout Christians and see no conflict between their Christian beliefs and their science. There's not a fundamental conflict. Now, there are, I freely admit, Christians who deny science. There are also Christians who say a lot of other dumb things. I'm not exempt from saying dumb things. But the Christians who deny science don't speak for everybody. So, when you hear that, please don't think that I am a skeptic or fundamentally I have a problem with science, because I don't, and neither do the teachings of Christianity. Third misconception. I am in the same category as a Unification Church member, or a Jehovah's Witness, or a member of the Latter-day Saints. It's possible that there are people in here who belong to one of those groups. If that's true, let me see if I can get this out in the words that I want it. People who are members of the Unification Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, Latter-day Saints, the people themselves, immensely lovable people. The teachings have problems, and I got to go beyond saying they have problems. They're not Christian teachings at all. You heard me say a minute ago, I have friends who are biologists and chemists and physicists, and they are constantly just saying there is so much junk science out there. There are so many people who are selling a product, and they'll use language that sounds scientific, but real scientists who know the science say that's nonsense. The same is true of a lot of people who talk religious talk. It just so happens that I'm a Texas Baptist. I have friends who are Methodists and Catholic and Lutheran, and there are lots of denominations who emphasize little parts of Christian teaching. And then there are groups that so mangle what the Bible teaches and what Christian teaching is that they're not properly included in Christian teaching at all. So some of the ones that you hear about that do very troubling things, that coerce people, that tell people to give away all their money, that tell people to cut themselves off from their friends and their family, those are junk science. And I feel toward them, I feel compassion for the people who belong to them, but I feel towards those teachings the same way my friends in the natural sciences feel about junk science. Fairly angry about it, actually. Okay, 3 more, and then we will wrap it up. Well, actually, 3 more quick misconceptions, and then I started off with a story, I'm going to end with a story. 4th misconception is that I'm different from you because I worship. This is what Christians do, they worship. Here's what they get together on Sunday mornings and they have a worship service and they worship. Here's the point I want to make about that misconception. Everybody worships. Everybody. The most militant atheist you know worships. Because here's what worship means. It has a very simple meaning. All of us have things that are priorities in our lives, and one thing is the top priority. For a lot of parents, it's their children. For a lot of athletes, especially professional athletes, it's their sport. For performers, it might be their music. For actors, it might be their acting career. Everybody's got one top priority. You have a top priority. It might not be the same every day, but you have one. Worship just means that God's your top priority. And you take everything that you do and you measure it against. Is this a way of following God? Is this a way of glorifying God? That's the only thing worship means. 5th misconception. I am different from you because I have faith. I'm going to tackle that one the same way I tackled worship. Everybody has faith. Atheists have faith. Scientists have faith. A lot of scientists, the methods that they use in collecting and analyzing their data, they do not fully understand how those methods were arrived at. They didn't invent those methods. They could not rebuild the equipment that they use. They take the results of their measurements on faith. Faith does not mean you ignore evidence. I have a lifelong adult career specializing in what's good evidence, what's bad evidence. Faith means you know that evidence doesn't get you all the way there. So you look at the available evidence and you go on beyond where the evidence leaves off and you keep trying to learn. That is all faith means. And the last of the misconceptions is that I brought up Christianity and I'm talking about it because I want to convert all of you. Actually, I could open my Bible and I could walk you through the teachings in the Bible that say that it's not possible. I can't convert you. One Christian cannot convert another human being. It doesn't work that way. But I do know what the Bible teaches me I'm supposed to do is when I find people who have mistaken understandings of what Christian teaching is, I need to try to correct those so they understand it correctly. And as a teacher, that's also my job. And as someone who was brought over here on a grant to create an intercultural experience, so the Japanese students are prepared to meet and be successful in meetings with people from the United States and other parts of the West, if you properly understand Christianity, that's part of it. The number of people who identify as Christian in the United States is dropping, and in Europe it's plummeting. Doesn't change the fact that Christianity is baked into their history and into their institutions. So if you understand it wrong, that's going to trip you up. So I spent that chunk of time in part because I am a teacher of intercultural encounters, and that's something that is worthwhile to know. It's also part of knowing me. And I'm going to end. I started off today telling a story. I'm going to tell you another quick story. I think it'll be less than 10 minutes, probably less than 5. It comes in 3 parts. In the early 2000s, I had about $30,000. Maybe someone can convert that into yen. It was a ridiculous amount of money for where I was in life in student loan debt. That's how much student loan debt I had. So if you've got student loan debt, I have been there. And I did what my faith taught me to do about it. I prayed about it. And I prayed, God, get me out of debt. God, help me find a way to get out of debt. And one day a switch got flipped in my head and I realized this is not right. And I prayed differently and I said, it may be, God, that your purpose for me is I am going to be the one who can empathize and minister to people who've gone bankrupt. It may be that I'm going to wind up poor. And I am going to meet other people who are poor. And I'm going to be able to show them kindness and understanding because I am where they are. And you know what, God? If that's what you've got for me, and if that's what will glorify you, sign me up. I'm okay with it. That week, I got a phone call from an aunt. My grandmother's estate had been settled. By the end of the weekend, I had a check in my hand for $33,000. Wiped out my student loan debt. Not long after that, I was still finishing my doctorate, and the last thing you have to do when you do a doctorate is you have to write a dissertation. I got stuck with writer's block on my dissertation. Not for a week, not for a month. For 7 years, I had writer's block. And for all those years, I told people, I've got all this research, I have a topic, I have a ton of things I've collected. If I could ever bring it into focus and decide what my argument is, I could write my dissertation in 6 weeks. Well, one night I had a little talk with God about it, and I had that lesson from student loan debt still fresh in my memory, and I said, God, there are some people who try a doctorate and they never finish it. And maybe that's what you're preparing me for. Maybe I'm going to be your missionary to people who try things and fail them and have been crushed by it, and I'm going to show them empathy and compassion because the same thing happened to me. And if that's the work you have for me, okay. Not long after, I was sitting, watching TV, hadn't given it up yet, and I had a legal pad in my lap because I was doodling out notes for the classes I was going to teach in the next term, and kaboom, I started writing. And I filled that page, and I filled the next page, and I looked down at it, and I said, this is the argument for my dissertation. And I used to say if I could ever figure out the argument, I'd write it in 6 weeks. It took 3. The last of the 3 parts of the story. About 15 months ago, I applied for a Fulbright grant to come teach all of you. Fulbright grants are very competitive. I've known a lot of people who applied for them 2, 3, 4, 5 times and eventually gave up. The day I started the process of applying, I had a little talk with God, and I said, God, if you've got work for me to do in Japan, I'll know, because you'll open the door. And if I'm just being a tourist, I want you to shut the door and keep me in Oregon. And every time I hit a roadblock along the way, I had another talk with God, and I said, okay, I know if you've got work for me